Welcome to the Line Movement Betting Show. I am James Lynch. I'm not Daniel Levy. I'm trying to look like Daniel Levy, but I'm not Daniel Levy. I'm James Lynch, filling in for Daniel Levy. We hope he can get his internet back sooner than later. And we're going to be previewing today, myself and Dan Tom, the UFC Vegas 8 Anthony Smith versus Alexander Rakic card, which is coming up this Saturday at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. But first, I got to throw it over to my co-host, Dan Tom. Dan, how's it going? Appreciate you having me on your show.
It's going great. It's going better that you're here, James. And folks, I'm sorry. I know James Lynch must have a time machine. There's no other way he gets all the work and great content that he always does. But I could not let him borrow it for us for this betting show because I tell you, looking in the future would come in handy on this card, James.
Certainly would. We got a lot to talk about today. First off, if you haven't seen me, I'm on Line Movement. I do the interviews. I also host Octagon Outlook every Monday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. So I appreciate you guys joining us here for today's show. Definitely get on the bandwagon. It's one of the best shows out there. But let's start first with the main event. And we got to tell our Canadian listeners that you guys can bet on this fight through BlitzBet. It's blitzbet.eu. For Canadian listeners, you can definitely go there right now. Check out the odds. And that's what we're going to be referencing here today on the show. Americans, just wait a little bit. We'll get there for you guys too, but that's how we're going to be referencing all the fights here today. So main event has got a lot of implications here. It's a light heavyweight contest between, like I mentioned, Anthony Lionheart Smith, the former light heavyweight title challenger, taking on Alexander Rakic, who is a up and comer in the division right now. And right now the odds makers have Alexander Rakic as a favorite, close to a 3-1 favorite in this one, which I find kind of interesting. We'll get into it in a second, but Anthony Smith obviously coming off that loss to Glover Teixeira in a fight where a lot of people felt like that match against Glover Teixeira should have been stopped a lot sooner. It didn't end up happening. Smith ends up taking the TKO loss in that one, and people felt like we probably wouldn't see Anthony Smith later this year, but here he is a few months later. And if you watch our interview here on Line Movement with Anthony Lionheart Smith, he mentioned how he wanted to get there even sooner. This guy is on a different level than the rest of us. He wants to get back in there and avenge that last loss. And he also mentioned how he is a guy that is looking to show more tools in this fight. There's some things that he says he's picked up that he didn't get to display in the Glover fight. I'm curious to see the game plan coming in here, Dan, just because of the fact that Smith started so strong in that fight against Glover Teixeira, and that's not typical of him. Usually he's the comeback king, the guy who starts slow and then finishes you later. But we'll start first with Anthony Smith. Dan, what do you think is going to be the game plan, and what are you looking at in this fight between these two fighters?
Well, referencing your interview, which was great, not just because you were doing it, but Anthony Smith is a really, and I hate using the term well-spoken, but he really gets you almost on his side of things. I was one of those, and I'm not changing my stance as far as, troubled by the stoppage, perhaps maybe even troubled, or at the very least surprised by such a quick turnaround of a booking. But when you listen to Anthony Smith talk about it, put some perspective, even sharing with you, James, correct me if I'm wrong, that he was even open to come again earlier if an opportunity were to have arise. Really kind of helps alleviate things for me on that side. Not to the point to where maybe I'm going to pick him here if I'm tipping my hand at all, but it's definitely something. But to answer your question, James, specifically as far as what to watch for, as far as change of strategy, I think it's going to come down to something he said in your interview when he said to you that he spent more time, and again, they've been doing great. You just look at the Contender Series this week. He spent more time with James Krause and company, I believe it was, the Glory MMA and Fitness crowd over there, as opposed to Factory X Muay Thai, where, they've been doing obviously great things too. He's got a great stable up there. I don't know geographically how much closer it is to Nebraska. He's still traveling for his camps, but tactically, James, I think that makes a difference. Like you said, we saw a different Anthony Smith go out there. We saw all these new skills that James Krause and company and Anthony Smith himself has equipped himself with, but the pacing, the characteristics of an Anthony Smith fight, it didn't quite feel its normal self.
Absolutely. And what I think about this fight is so interesting, kind of like last week's main event between Edgar and Munoz, is that we're going to get a lot of questions answered in this fight. How good is Alexander Rakic? You look at the loss on his record against Volkan Ozdemir, but if you go and watch that fight, I think most people felt like Rakic won that matchup. And if you go to MMA decisions right now, you look at the media scorecards, one media member scored the fight for Volkan Ozdemir. The rest scored it for Alexander Rakic. So he could very well be undefeated in the UFC. But like I mentioned, we still have some questions about Alexander Rakic. Sure, he's getting some impressive finishes. The win over Devin Clark, awesome knockout win there. Ran into a little bit of trouble early in that one, but was able to come back and get the finish. You look at the win over Jimmy Manua. Jimmy Manua, pretty high-ranked guy. However, I want to point out, retired shortly after that. he got the win over Justin Ledet as well, which was a decision. It was not a stoppage in that one. And then we talked about the fight against Ozdemir as well on top of that. So what I'm trying to say here, Dan, is that I don't know how good Rakic is. He's finishing guys that he's supposed to finish. But it's one of those cases where if I'm looking at Anthony Smith's resume and you look at the stoppage wins over Volkan Ozdemir, the stoppage win over Alexander Gustafsson, I think we can argue that experience is certainly on the side of Anthony Smith. And you don't even need to talk about those fights. Just look at the overall fights pushing 40 in his career, where, Rakic only has 14 fights. And I know Rakic has some other disciplines that he's trained in as well. But how much do you feel like experience will play into this? Because I feel like, you're either all in on Rakic and you're like, this guy's the future. And then I feel like, at the same time, we might be overlooking Smith a little bit here with what he's done and focusing too much on that last loss. Where do you stand on this?
It's tricky. You're right. It's a kind of an overcorrecting the steering wheel. And as I've said about this card, I think that's a theme, James, not just for this matchup, but for this entire card. And we'll get to that later. But as far as what you ask, as far as what this matchup goes, I think it is very dangerous because experience is the key word, James. And, I'm trying to find ways, whether it's, trends, whether it's public betting trends, fighter trends. Now we're even seeing COVID positive test trends, depending on what states where you're traveling from. You're trying to identify these things, right? Especially on this show here, we try to identify these trends. But here's the one I could perhaps levy the most confidence in, and you can bounce it back at me, James. You've been watching the same sample size as me, but I think experience and maybe a little bit of grapplers where we're talking about the small cages fights, but more broad stroke, more relevant to what we're talking about. Experience has been serving fighters extra well, I believe, in these pandemic era fights, without the normal training camps, without the normal fight environments or fight weeks leading up to those environments. It's different for media and fighters alike, folks. I believe the experience is really weighing in. So for that reason, even though I'm leaning as far as a pick goes toward the favorite, this betting line does kind of scare me off. If that's what you're getting at, James, I agree.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's sort of how I'm thinking about this fight. Look, Alexander Rakic should be favored in this fight. He's a little bit younger. He's taken way less damage. The only edge he doesn't have in this is experience. But if you look at the physicality between the two, they're pretty much the same height, have a similar reach. Like I mentioned, Rakic a little bit younger, only 4 years, not a huge gap there, not like the co-main event, which we'll get to a little bit later here. But I do look at the fact that Rakic is almost a 3-1 favorite based off what? Based off a couple nice stoppage wins. This kind of feels a little Johnny Walker-esque to me, Dan, if you know what I mean, where I think people are romanticizing a little bit too much about those wins. And I think at 3-1, that's a little too steep for my liking. I'm going to pick Rakic in this fight because I think over 3 rounds, I think he can do a little bit more than Anthony Smith. And that's something we didn't even bring up, is that this isn't a 5-round fight. So if Smith's going back to his old ways of the game plan, if he's trying to look for a comeback, he better do it pretty soon. So I expect Smith to go out there very, very fast in this one. But on the flip side, you've got all this experience with Anthony Smith. And I feel like, normally maybe he's a little bit overrated. I think in this case, he might be a little bit underrated. You should see the comments I'm getting on, the pros picks and even my podcast this week of all these Serbian fans who they love Rakic. And they're like, this is a mismatch. He's going to go out there and knock out Anthony Smith in the first round. What are you guys watching? Anthony Smith does not get finished in the first round. This is a durable guy. Even Glover, it took him a little bit to get that actual finish. We saw how tough he is. I think if Rakic does win this fight, I would lean more towards a decision or a later stoppage, but don't count out Anthony Smith in this fight. And I think there is some value on him as the underdog right now. If you go to BlitzBet, you can see that, he's anywhere from, plus 225 to, even a little bit higher. I think that there's value on that just with the experience factor. So curious to get your thoughts on that, Dan.
No, I love that. And then one thing really quick, when you were saying, it didn't surprise me because a lot of people, there's always the hype train, the athletic guy, the younger guy. And we see that, similar to perhaps in a lot of Western societies, we don't treat the elder statesmen, the elder people, so to speak, with as much respect and reverence as I argue they should be. But when you said that they were like Serbian fans and stuff, I just pictured, do you ever see that movie? What was it? Behind Enemy Lines with
Yes.
Owen Wilson. I remember he is the Serbian kid. He has the Ice Cube shirt and he's like, I show you my gun. My Uzi weighs a ton because I'm public enemy number one. So I don't want to overlook the Serbians, man. There's some tough people, as I brutally quote that movie in character. And I don't want to discount Rakic as I'm picking him. However, yes, if we're talking about from a betting perspective, if we're talking about a money line perspective, I should say, there's more value on the underdog here than the favorite. But speaking of that and betting angles, and why are you pumping up the guy you're not picking, Dan? Or perhaps they want to lump you in here, James, because I think you're leaning the same way as me, despite us being respectful to the Smith side. However, to put my money where my mouth is from the Rakic side, if you're looking at props or any of those angles, or if you have a house that offer those, what I found surprising, James, was because this ties into the stylistic fact, right? It gets dangerous when we talk about strength of schedule, because you're right. And we could have a Johnny Walker on our hands, or even a more proven guy like Ryan Bader. People were questioning his strength of schedule, and then look what happens to him. So it's really dangerous whether or not that argument ends up being right for someone like me to go by. So I always try to go by the styles, and the style in this main event match between Anthony Smith and Alexander Rakic, even though Smith does have the experience advantage, James, he's only seen the scorecards 4 times in 47 fights. 4 times.
That's
so
true.
Anthony Smith is a do or die fighter. And the longer Rakic has to be in there with him, the more dangerous it is. So, in my opinion, I felt more comfortable picking Rakic, the fact that it's a 3-round fight. He only has to survive for 3 rounds. Yes, he has a lot of TKOs and flashy stuff, but really, I would argue he's almost more of a point fighter on the feet. And I could see him using that similar kind of tactic, maybe even scoring some takedowns, although it'll be dangerous if he doesn't respect the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that Smith has. But I actually see James, especially in this fight, this stage of his career, Rakic as more of a point fighter. So I'm going to pick him by decision. And the reason why I set that up in relation to the odds, because I found this funny. You're probably getting near even to favorite odds to get Rakic to win inside the distance, depending on what house you're looking at. But you're getting anywhere from +2 to 1 odds, plus 250 to 255 and upwards for Rakic by decision, which I feel like is the most logical outcome as far as a Rakic winning side. So I feel like there's some value on that. Am I talking crazy here?
No, absolutely not. I'm with you right there. And, a lot of people hate it when you say, oh, decision, that's a safe bet. But really, you got to look at it. You mentioned the durability of Anthony Smith. You mentioned the fact that Rakic has gone the distance before. Look at the Justin Ledet fight. Look at the Ozdemir fight, right? He couldn't finish him. So I know, styles make fights, like we've discovered. And look, Alexander Rakic could be the guy that goes out there and does become a contender. And this is the fight that he does it. This is a key test for both guys, because I'll tell you what, if Anthony Smith loses, his days as a contender, I think, are over at this point, right? I know he's not that old, but, you lose another fight like this, it's a really big setback. Conversely, for Rakic, is he the real deal? Was that Volkan fight, a fight that was close, that didn't go his way? He's got to build from that, and he's got to say, look, that was a mistake by the judges. I am that good. If he doesn't pass this test, then he's just going to be a middling fighter as well. So a lot on the line for both guys, but I'm with you on the decision thing. I think on both ends, I mean, there's a possibility Smith could finish Rakic, but he's also a guy that's very tough to finish. So I think decision is most likely either way, whichever side of the coin you're looking at here.
Yeah, I'm not a big hedge guy, to be honest, but there's definitely those opportunities, especially if Smith is a do or die fighter like we suspect. I think you're getting 4 to 5 to 1 plus odds on that side. So it's one of those fights where you can play from both sides and still enjoy this fight, I guess.
Let's move along to a similar fight from our main event to the co-main event, where we have Neil Magny taking on a replacement in Robbie Lawler. If you guys saw our interview here on the Line Movement channel, speedy recovery to Jeff Neal, obviously dealing with some serious health issues, ones that almost took his life. So Jeff, really, wanted this fight. He hasn't fought in a while. It's unfortunate that he didn't get to get it. But Dan, I'll tell you this, it's very rare to get a replacement opponent that's almost as exciting, or if not more exciting, than who was fighting there before. And you've got the ruthless one, Robbie Lawler, now replacing against Neil Magny. And a lot of interesting tidbits going into this one. First off, Robbie Lawler has not fought in a while. It's been, more than a year since he last fought, when he lost to Colby Covington in his last fight, which was, of course, the fight that got Colby the fight against Kamaru Usman. So still a notable guy in the division. And then you've got, obviously, Neil Magny coming into this off back-to-back wins. Really has turned things around since that loss to Santiago Ponzinibbio, getting 2 solid wins, in my opinion, over Ali and then Rocco Martin in his last fight. And a little bit of history there. If you guys, I spoke to Neil Magny over at MMA News, and he just talked about how, he and Robbie trained together ages ago. So there's a respect factor there. Robbie's not going to fight anyone at this stage in his career. He obviously respects Neil enough, and they used to train back in the day at the Hit Squad when Neil was first starting out in his career. And he gave credit to Lawler. He said, look, he's a guy that, made it hard on me when I was starting out, and I had to figure out whether this was something I wanted. But he said that having that training really pushed him to get ahead. So a little bit of interesting tidbits as far as that goes heading into the fight. But as far as the odds go, Neil Magny on BlitzBet right now is similar to Rakic. He's almost a 3-1 favorite in this fight, and that's interesting to me. I definitely see it. Neil Magny does have a height and reach advantage in this fight and has been a lot more active. I talked about the fact that Lawler hasn't fought since the Covington fight. So, going into this one, a little bit of, cage rest, whatever you want to call it. And Robbie Lawler a lot older, 38 years old heading into this fight. The Robbie Lawler that we saw win the welterweight title, the Robbie Lawler that we saw defending the welterweight title, I don't know if that Robbie Lawler exists. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this fight from a stylistic perspective, Dan. How are you looking at this one?
Man, I'm currently got my comb in this fight. I've almost made it through to kind of finish the coiffed of the hair. But so far, James, I'll tell you exactly where I'm at. I wasn't surprised to see Neil Magny installed as the favorite. And I'm not even surprised to see this line movement. However, I think this is going to be a 2-outcome fight in most people's head when looking at said line movement, James. Magny opened at a -140 favorite, which I actually thought was kind of low. I would have thought maybe -160 or -170. I'm a big Brutal Bob Lawler fan, folks. Don't get it twisted. I'm just being honest to where these fighters are at now and stylistically. James, you said it's rare to get another fun fight. How about this? How about another southpaw or stylistically similar southpaw, a striking savvy southpaw who's very dangerous from the left side with kicks and strikes like Jeff Neal, which is Robbie Lawler. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a more better replacement, except you're getting much, no offense to Jeff Neal, who obviously we're wishing him a speedy recovery, but you get the name value of a former champion as well. And I believe, no offense to Robbie Lawler, reversing that, it's a less dangerous fight. Now, Lawler could go out here and knock Neil Magny out. I'm still going to stick to that statement because on paper, I still feel like a Robbie Lawler knockout is a lot less likely than a Jeff Neal knockout would have been. Just my opinion there. So for that reason, we're seeing on the betting lines, James, this bet almost is a true outcome fight. Whereas Lawler money, it's, which is weird. The plus money, especially now, is more than enough value-wise if you're looking to take a shot on Lawler. But people are banking on that inside the distance, whereas money for Magny by decision is coming in real heavy. But I'll tell you what I'm looking at, James, and this might kind of lead us to prediction territory, but I'm not there yet, so don't hold me to it. I'm not saying this is something that you're going to see on my Line Movement Bets article, which make sure you check that out every week at linemovement.com. We got events every week till December going down. But Magny round 3 is actually plus 1650. And I say that is because potent round 3 finishers and potent round 3 lines, you'll usually find them around plus 1200, plus 1300, and they'll be bet down to around plus 900. So to see a Magny guy who is such a round 3 fighter against Lawler, who takes rounds off, is getting older, and is becoming more of a first round fighter, to see it north of the average is really surprising there for you degenerate prop players out there.
Yes, very something to consider. Magny actually knocked out Hector Lombard in the 3rd round, if you remember that back in 2016. So it is possible. The thing I look at in this fight is it's a bit tricky of a matchup because, you obviously want to fade Lawler with the age, with the losing streak, but you got to look at that losing streak a little bit closer. Colby Covington was his last loss. This is the guy who nearly defeated Kamaru Usman back at UFC 245. And as we know, Usman's proven to be the best welterweight right now in the world. I mean, I don't think it's a crazy statement to make something like that. So, losing to Covington, not a bad loss. The Askren loss, some controversy, obviously. Herb Dean, felt he was out. It was a submission win for Ben Askren, but he hit Askren like a truck, and that fight could have almost been stopped the way Askren was hit early on in that one. And then he lost to Rafael Dos Anjos before that. So, I mean, we're talking about two, in Covington and Dos Anjos, a former champion, Covington, a former interim champion. Ben Askren was undefeated at the time. But the thing that also surprises me too, that I kind of forgot about, is that if you look at the last knockout win for Robbie Lawler, it's May of 2014. It's been that long. Now, I know he's fighting tough guys, like I mentioned, but still, I mean, people thinking that Lawler's just going to go out there and knock out Neil Magny in the 1st round. I don't think that's the case. Now, look, Magny traditionally in the past has been a slow starter. I can name a handful of fights where it looked like he was down and out, but somehow survived. The fight in particular that I was thinking of is the Haigun Lim fight, where Lim had him in a lot of trouble, and Magny was able to persevere and ended up getting the knockout himself in the 2nd round. So it's a tricky fight. I do look at the fact that Neil Magny does go the distance a lot. He's got one finish, I think, think in his last like 4 fights, a lot of them are decisions. Like even a guy like Carlos Condit, who you could say in some ways is similar to Lawler in terms of the damage taken, the age, everything else. And, he couldn't finish him. So while that prop is very tempting to me in terms of taking like a late finish on Neil Magny, I do think the decision prop might be worth a little bit more just because Magny's a guy that's used to going that way. And I don't think Lawler's at the point yet in his career. Maybe he is. Maybe we'll find that out on Saturday. But I don't think he's at the point yet where the chin's gone. Certainly he's taken a lot of, had a lot of wars in his career. It certainly added up. The last time Lawler's been knocked out was actually against Tyron Woodley in a fight that surprised everyone. I don't know what the prop was on that first round finish for Woodley by knockout, but it must have been something crazy. So I do think that I feel more strongly in the co-main event as far as my pick with going with Neil Magny. I think unless Lawler is showing us something we haven't seen over the last couple fights, I think Magny, with the fact that he's taller, more active, younger, and not just that, but comes from a great camp at Elevation Fight Team where the conditioning is top notch. So Lawler can't afford to take any shortcuts, can't take any rounds off. Magny's going to outwork him similar to Covington, maybe not the same pace as Covington, but still outwork him and get a decision here. That's how I'm calling this fight. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's great, especially the caveat there, how close it is. And I agree, I would lean more toward decision. However, I think this is one of those things now. I don't know if you can bet that prop live, but I do believe there'll be a live betting opportunity. And this sounds crazy, but I've said it on this show before. I've said it on my podcast before a bunch of times recently. This is one of those weird matchups where you almost want the guy you're betting on to get rocked early and for the other guy to drain all his energy, because then I think that opens up the first round finish. The Hector Lombard fight you cited, James, obviously Magny got hurt early. That right hook from the southpaw, it's really potent. Kelvin Gastelum hit him with another southpaw, rocked Magny with a similar shot. But if Magny survives that, I tell you, I'll be live betting Magny at that point, because you just made your guy pull out your box of tricks. And the last 2 things on this matchup, as far as that betting caveat goes, just to touch on your examples, which were great. It's deceptive sample size. The matchup with Askren was a weird one, right? And you, James, you know this. Me and you are 2 of the media members that folks. You guys don't got to. We can grade Colby Covington as a fighter without getting diluted by the other things. I think we've proven that to be fair. So in no way am I discounting Covington either. However, the problem was looking back at those matchups is say what you will about the outcome of the Askren fight, the fact that Askren's entries, which aren't the greatest, he was able to get to the body lock and get to Robbie Lawler's hips, is a problem, because that's where Magny turns these fights around from the Humgulim fight you cited and onward, right? And conversely, how do we stop Magny? It's been leg kicks. We saw Ponzinibbio pick up on that after Lorenz Larkin pulled out the blueprint. And now, let's look at Robbie Lawler. Well, it's going to be a little tougher. It's the mirrored match, right? The open stance match, which means he'll have the inside leg kick, but he's going to have to switch up for that lesser powerful outside leg kick. It's a harder stance matchup to achieve leg kicks. And when he fought Colby Covington, James, Robbie Lawler got a southpaw versus southpaw matchup. Now, the good thing about that is it opens up leg kicks for a southpaw who never gets to throw his outside leg kick. How many leg kicks did Robbie Lawler throw? He only threw 7. Now, he landed 7. He landed 100%, but 25 minutes, and he only threw 7 leg kicks. I don't think those numbers compute for Lawler, who's not a big leg kick guy, to all of a sudden turn it up. I mean, who knows? He's probably going to, I say this, James, he's going to go out there and leg kick TKO Magny. But the fact is, unless I have seen the fighter do it, I can't bet on it. So right now I'm leaning toward Magny by decision, but I may be sprinkling on that round 3 prop.
Certainly some interesting things. This is why Dan Tom's the best analyst in the game. That's something I completely missed as far as a leg kick. So that's why it's good to have you here on the show. And I hope you guys are enjoying the show today, of course, that we do, that Dan and Dan do every week here on Line Movement. Let's move along, I should say, to the women's flyweight division. We've got a newcomer to the division, Alexa Grasso, going to be taking on Ji-Yeon Kim. And right now, the odds makers have Alexa Grasso as about a 3-1 favorite, which, look, I get it. I totally get it. I'm going to keep this very simple for you, Dan, and then we'll get your technical analysis here, but this is a pretty simple fight for me. I think Alexa Grasso is the better fighter. I think the problem with Alexa Grasso, she had so much hype when she came into the UFC that she didn't live up to. That Felice Herrig fight comes to mind at strawweight, where She was supposed to win that. She didn't. And she sort of bounced around back and forth between wins and losses. But I do think she is the better fighter here. The only issue is that she's moving up a weight class and she's fighting an opponent who's going to have a height and reach advantage in this fight in Kim. And Kim hasn't looked too bad either. She's got some coming off that stoppage win over Nadia Kassem in her last fight. But I think Grasso, if you look at the level of competition, you look at the skill set that she possesses, good striking, good ground game, good wrestling. She's got a bit of everything in this fight. The question is, can she deal with the height and reach? So that's why, from my perspective, and that's why I'm keeping this a little bit short here, I think that the line's a little too steep for Alexa Grasso, but I do think she is the better fighter. But the thing that worries me in this, Dan, is that if Kim is able to use that height and reach advantage and Grasso can't get on the inside, and let's say maybe that strength from strawweight does not translate to flyweight, that's another concern for me here. So we'll see how she looks. I just worry this could be another Ray Borg situation, like how Borg moved up from 25 to 35, and you just saw how much smaller he was and how much he couldn't deal with the stronger fighters in that division. Now, I don't think that'll be the case here for Grasso, but it is something to keep in mind here. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of Grasso now moving up to 125, which, by the way, I should mention was because she missed weight in her last fight, and clearly she can't make 115 anymore. So what is your thoughts on that?
I'm glad you brought up the weight cut because I think that's the easy thing to miss here, James. And for me, it's the big thing. It's the big thing, regardless of the result of the fight. I'm not overlooking Kim, although my pick is going to be Grasso if I'm giving that away. But it's going to be the weight. It's going to be the weight. She did miss. Is it like a Cynthia Calvillo? And not to compare, similar girls, similar weight classes of similar heritage, but you're like, okay, they're not like ridiculously ripped. They're not like big in these Chris Cyborg senses of the ways. How is that strength going to translate for Calvillo? We still saw her hitting takedowns, and whatnot. For Grasso, is she going to have that much more pop to her volume, which is my more stylistic question with her. Now, what I like, James, and I don't like, I know it's a tricky time to even mention races or anything like that, but I'll tell you what, man, when you get two races like Mexican fighters and Korean fighters together, only good things happen. You get Dong Young Ma versus Pollo Reyes, right? You get Yair Rodriguez versus the Korean Zombie. I mean, something about these two tough fighting nations. So if you're Mexican or Korean, be proud of your fighters. You got a lot to be proud about over there. Good things happen. So to get a taste of it from the female side, part of me is hoping for an Invicta Classic, like a Mizuki Grasso type fight. I see this going long. Kim's not been finished. Again, not to play the stereotype. She's a very tough fighter. I'm going to be looking for her technical advancements. You don't want her to be, getting by on too much. A Chinese fighter, I think Yu Wunan, is very similar, very big and strong for her weight class. It's just, can she get the technical holes filled in? A lot of questions. This is definitely going to be targeted by bettors for parlays, James, because if you're looking at the odds on this whole card, I think parlays and prop shots are going to be pretty popular because that's what the odds are telling you to do. So I'm going to pick Grasso by decision. Maybe look for that points handicaps if you're looking to play with things on fight day. But that's kind of my basic take here.
Yeah, and I will also go Grasso by decision in this fight. I think more likely than not. And again, I hate to pick 3 straight decisions, but we're talking about two fighters that do go the distance a lot. I know Kim finished her last fight, but Nadia Kassem, in my opinion, is kind of holding on to her UFC spot, whereas I think Grasso a lot more talented. I don't think Grasso. In fact, Grasso has, I think, only ever been finished by Suarez, at least in the UFC. So it's been a while since we've seen her in that sort of trouble. And Suarez is an animal. So in a good way, she's one of the best fighters at 115 there. Let's move along here to a switch up we actually had on the main card. It was supposed to be Ricardo Lamas taking on Ryan Hall. I know everyone was looking forward to that one, but instead we got a pretty awesome fighter replacing him in Bill Algeo. Now, Algeo, everyone remembers him from Contender Series last year. He had that absolute war with Brendan Loughnane. But I've known about Bill Algeo for a very long time. One thing I don't think people realize is that Bill Algeo nearly got in the UFC way back in 2017, and he lost to a featherweight that people are pretty familiar with, pretty popular on Twitter, actually, and a guy by the name of Jared Gordon. There was a key fight at CFFC 83 back in February of 2017, and Gordon ended up beating Algeo by decision. You notice Gordon's next fight was in the UFC. Algeo ended up having to fight some more in the regional scene. So Algeo's a guy that's been on the cusp for a while, and he had his opportunity last year at Contender Series, like I mentioned, fell short. UFC, that was kind of a funny fight anyways, because obviously Dana White didn't even sign Brendan Loughnane, which was crazy because that was just such an awesome fight. And Dana, of course, with his famous last words saying, well, you went for a takedown. You shouldn't have done that. So what are you going to do about that? But Bill Algeo is absolutely a UFC ready opponent. And looking at the odds right now, Ricardo Lamas is the favorite here coming into this one. He is, again, almost a 3-1 favorite heading into this matchup right now on BlitzBet. So interesting there. And I get it. I mean, Lamas has fought the who's who. And, his last loss, for example, Calvin Kattar. I mean, we're talking about one of the best featherweights in the division right now. He lost to him. He got knocked out. But there are concerns here with Ricardo Lamas, in my opinion. We talk about the age here, 38 years old, hasn't fought since June of last year. That's a pretty long layoff. He's lost 3 of his last 4 fights. Now, level of competition similar to the co-main event, right? He's losing to Kattar, Mirsad Bektic, Josh Emmett. I mean, those are all great fighters in that division. Has a win in between there over Darren Elkins. So in terms of who they've fought, I mean, clearly Ricardo Lamas has fought the who's who. He's fought Aldo, he's fought everyone, right? He's been in the UFC forever. But with Algeo, he's one of those guys that has beat the guys he's supposed to. Actually, the win that got him in the UFC is the guy, Tim Dooling, that he already beat back in 2017, and he defeated him by decision this time. And Dooling right now is 9-7, so not a great win to get you in there, but nonetheless, you look at Bill Algeo's record. His losses are against really good guys. I mentioned Jared Gordon, Brendan Loughnane. How about Shane Burgos? He lost to him back in 2014 as well. So it's not like the losses he has are against guys that are terrible. I mean, they're really solid guys. I mean, nothing against Dean Lavin, but that was a second pro fight, so we can ignore that one too. You look at the height and reach, maybe look for some angles there. Bill Algeo, 6 feet tall, 73.5 inch reach. Lamas, 5'8" with a 71 inch reach. So Algeo will have a height and reach advantage in this fight. And he's a little bit younger, 7 years younger, actually. Shouldn't say a little bit, that's a lot. So with that said, I'm going to actually go with the dog in this fight, Dan, because I think there's some value here with the sense that you got a younger guy who really didn't even think he was going to be in the UFC, especially after that loss on Contender Series. He gets a win. He's back in the driver's seat. I had a feeling that if he didn't get a short notice fight, Algeo would probably be back in Contender Series. So the fact that he's getting this opportunity on short notice, I mean, he knows no matter what, because he's stepping up for the UFC, he's going to get another shot here. So he can almost go for broke here. Now, the issue obviously is that Algeo's not exactly like a, big time finisher. It's usually a submission when it comes to him getting it done. His last TKO win was that first dueling fight back in 2017. So I don't think it's going to be the type of Calvin Kattar and Ricardo Lamas type fight where you see like a quick finish here. But I do think there is value here on Algeo, and I do think that either a later stoppage or potentially a decision here could be some value there. What are you thinking on this one? Because I do see some value on the dog here.
Yeah, Lamas opened at -265, and I don't hate that. I don't even hate the time off, James, when we're talking about experienced fighters, especially fighters coming off knockout losses. I would argue those are good things. However, the age, that's the biggest flag for me here. You never know when that bottom's going to drop out. It's not bantamweight 38, but he's not far off. He's a big featherweight. So that featherweight is only one weight class up. And I know Frank Yeager just got a win at, I believe, 38 years old at bantamweight. So it's not a hold all be true. However, these are things you definitely got to watch out for. I admittedly did not go back and run Algeo through the comb. So I'm going off of memory from what I saw pre and for his Contender Series fight against Brendan. And the good thing is I'd like this fight in the small cage, James. I think that between that and Algeo's style, I think that's going to force Lamas to fight. Lamas, even in fights where he ends up submitting the grappler like Charles Oliveira, like he's got that kind of MMA masters dance around. I'm going to throw naked leg kicks down. I'm not crapping on MMA masters. They just did really great. Shouts to Rafael Alves, who looked like Jose Aldo. Hopefully Lamas had him available to him back when he fought Aldo. So I'm not trying to crap on that camp, but on the striking side of things, I believe they have a Capoeira guy, not Daniel Valverde, the other guy. And so you see a lot of like naked kicks. And we see a lot of those guys get countered and knocked out, whether it's Cesar Fajeda or the fight we just mentioned and the fighter we're talking about, Calvin Kattar over Ricardo Lamas. So in other words, James, whether the listeners there are doing their own version of tape study or when I go back through here and start kind of really peeling through the details, I'm going to be looking to see how well Bill counters kicks. Now, if he counters kicks really well and he does it normally, then I think what you're saying definitely has got some legs to it. And I know you already stated it, James. I know he doesn't have a lot of finishes when you look at it. Some guys are late bloomers, and deservedly so when you're coming from a tough scene and fighting tough guys. And some guys don't start fighting their knockout power till much later in their career. That's actually not as uncommon as we think. And 2 of those TKOs were within the last, few years, 3 to 7 fights or so. So maybe this is a skill that Bill is bringing to the table. So you're not crazy, James, but I am going to pick Lamas here. I expect him to be a popular parlay piece out of name value, which scares me and maybe leads to your value angle.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. The other thing I'll quickly mention with Algeo, obviously, trains, in New Jersey. That's usually where he's, calling home base. But he did spend some time earlier in his career at TriStar. He's good buddies with Zach Makovsky. Remember the former UFC fighter. So, I know that he's had some training under Frost as well. So we'll see what the game plan is heading in. Very intelligent fighter as well. So we'll see if that plays a role in the fight as far as that goes. All right, let's get to the highly anticipated rematch. Don't want to jinx anything because I feel like this, rematches that are highly anticipated, sometimes they don't happen. But we've got Magomed Ankalaev taking on Cutelaba. Of course, their first fight ended with a bit of controversy. It was a quick finish, but people felt like the referee stepped in a little bit too soon on that one, with Ankalaev getting the win. So that's where they're doing the rematch. And then the first fight, or the first rematch they were supposed to have that was scheduled, was obviously knocked out due to Cutelaba getting COVID-19. So now here we are finally seeing this fight on Saturday, and it's a great one. And just looking at the odds right now, you've got Cutelaba as a underdog coming in here, and you've got Ankalaev at about a 3-1 favorite, which is understandable. I'm going to keep this one simple, kind of like the Grasso fight. I think Ankalaev is a better fighter. I think his striking's better. I think that first fight was no fluke, and I think had the ref not stepped in, I think it was only a matter of time before he finished Cutelaba. The thing I don't like about Cutelaba, and I talked about this a little bit on Octagon Outlook on Monday, is just the inconsistency. I mean, here's a guy that will go out and have a good performance, and then he loses to, someone he should beat. I always look at the Misha Cirkunov fight. I know that was early on in his career, but that's a fight he should have won, and he did, and he looked bad in that one, and Cirkunov was able to take advantage. So there's that angle of it, and there's just the fact that Ankalaev, great record, great striking. I think the first fight is going to play out similar to the second fight, only this time we're not going to have any controversy. However, I will say it's going to be a second round knockout instead of a first round knockout. I think both guys are going to kind of feel each other out, see how they are. It's been a while since they fought, so I think they're really going to go in there, test each other out, get the timing down, and then I think you'll see Ankalaev crack Cutelaba and then go in for a TKO finish. That's how I'm leaning on this one. Keeping it simple here, Dan. What are your thoughts on this fight?
Yeah, I don't hate the line either. I'll keep this one simple because it's really a tough fight to bet regardless of how you feel. I like Ankalaev, Dagestani Stipe Miocic, as I like to refer to him as. And just do it. Just do the imagine. Just look at the photo, folks. You'll see what I'm talking about. The point is, I think Dagestani Stipe, who is a southpaw, Cutelaba's had mixed success when you look at his record there with those guys. And I think we're going to see a lot of that same thing. Cutelaba's problem is his emotion. I think his emotion is going to be worse. Funny note, though, James, I'm looking back to try to remember what fight it was. But obviously, he oversold the ref by playing possum like he was hurt and sold it so well the ref stopped the fight. He's actually done that in fights before, which is worries me if this is this guy's version of getting crafty. So if he only has 2 gears of getting crafty and canceling the fight on himself or going until someone gets stopped, well, then I think Ankalaev wins there. But I'm even scared to bet the chalky props of inside the distance or round 1, because just with the nature of this fight, like I could also see these guys breathe on each other for 3 rounds as well in a really boring fight. But I'll go Ankalaev by round 1 knockout.
Let's go to the prelims. We're only going to talk about 2 fights on here that we were kind of discussing ahead of time. We're going to look at that strawweight fight between Mallory Martin and Hannah Cyphers. I got insight on both because I spoke to both fighters leading into the fight, and some interesting stuff about Mallory Martin that you probably haven't heard elsewhere. That's where you're getting something a little bit different here with me in the host seat here. Mallory Martin, well, first off, let's talk about her as a favorite here. Well, I was actually surprised to see the line was this wide, but Mallory Martin is 3-1. A lot of 3-1 favorites on this card. I don't know if Mallory Martin should be one necessarily, but I am favoring her in this fight. But let me go into a little bit more detail about both fighters heading into this one. Okay, so Mallory Martin, what she told me in the interview we did earlier was that she was really sick in her last fight. She thinks she might have had COVID. I find this very interesting because Mallory Martin has had so many issues throughout her career that have really hindered her, yet she's still got a decent record and got some decent wins in her career. But that last fight was a short notice one against Janaroba, and she just spoke about how sick she was. And in hindsight, she says she probably should have pulled out of the fight. I mean, that's how sick she was. And so, she didn't look great in that one. And I remember watching that being like, Mallory kind of looks off a little bit. And that's not taking anything away from Janaroba. Obviously, she went out there there, and she's a great fighter. Look what she did to Felice Herrig in her last fight. But I think in general, Mallory Martin's the type of fighter where, we should have saw a little bit more in that debut. And I think we're going to see that in this fight. Now, I referenced some of the things that have been plaguing her career. She had a really bad knee injury, Dan, so much so that she got surgery finally after all these years. And she says that it's just been like a world of difference. So we're going to see a lot of, scrambles, a lot of, takedowns, things like that. I mean, Mallory Martin is at Elevation Fight Team, which has been on a roll as of late. You got Montana De La Rosa coming up and got her fight. You got Shauna Dobson with her huge upset win last week over Agapova. So that team's just firing on all cylinders. And the conditioning is top notch too. So Mallory Martin definitely should be the favorite in this fight. 3-1 though, a little steep for my liking, but I do like Mallory Martin in this fight. Now let's talk about Hannah Cyphers. I've said this a lot. I don't know what her management team was thinking giving her that last fight, but why is someone who really should be fighting at atomweight? Let's be honest here, Dan. I mean, Hannah Cyphers is 5'1". She's strong like a tank. That's why she can hang at strawweight. But in general, if there was an atomweight division, she'd be an absolute killer there. But she had to fight at flyweight in her last fight. And she fought someone in Agapova who, is just an absolute killer and is way bigger than her too. And that certainly played in the fight. I mean, Hannah, wasn't able to deal with the size and ended up getting submitted in the very first round. But I feel like this is one of those cases too, where you got to look at the level of competition, right? Hannah lost to Agapova in that last fight, and she's way bigger than her as a flyweight. Hannah's, now fighting someone her own size in Mallory Martin. I think Martin's only got like a 3-inch height advantage in the fight. But you look at the losses before that, Mackenzie Dern. Most women are getting submitted by Mackenzie Dern, Dan. Let's be honest here, right? And then you've got Angela Hill as well, who's, really turned her career around after coming back to the UFC from Invicta's. Looked great, so not a bad loss there. She got the back-to-back wins over Jodie Escobar and Polyana Viana and lost to Macy Barber in her debut. Another short notice fight against someone the UFC's been building for a while. And even in that fight, I remember Hannah threw some good shots at Macy early on. So Hannah is definitely a gamer. She's a farm girl. She's someone that, has that strength that I think a lot of opponents don't in that division. So Hannah does have a chance in this fight. I mean, if she's able to, keep the takedowns off, if she's able to keep this fight on the feet, I think there is a chance she could win this. But I just think Mallory Martin's ground game is so much better. So how I'm going with this fight is I don't think Mallory is going to go out there and, necessarily, absolutely dominate Hannah Cyphers, but I do think it will get to the mat at some point. And I think that's where Mallory Martin will take advantage. Remember, this is someone who also was training at Zingano, BJJ forever. So her ground game is top notch. I think if it does get to the ground, she will submit Hannah Cyphers. And I think Mallory Martin, we've seen that. We saw the submission win over Ashley Nichols, over Lindsey Williams and LFA. So she's someone that can definitely go out there and get the finish. And we know the weakness for Hannah Cyphers is on the ground. And I think that's going to happen here in this fight. So I'm going to go Mallory Martin by second round submission. Look for that submission prop, a lot better value than 3-1, because I do think it's a little more even if it stays on the feet. But I want to get your take on this fight.
I feel like the submission prop is about the only angle. If you're looking for Mallory Martin, that's where I see her advantage. But it's crazy, man. I almost feel like you in the last fight, James, with Bill Algeo. Because maybe it's the Dobson fight that you just referenced, because I hate these lines. And even though I picked out Agapova, I verbalized my almost disgust on the show with these wide lines. And I even said, if Dobson hits, now this is going to be the biggest favorite odds wise, and everybody's going to be arguing about it and going, how did that happen? Well, if we keep seeing lines on this, it's going to keep happening. And the Rousey home will seem a lot less special in hindsight. Neither here nor there. This isn't as criminal, James, obviously. That being said, I do sentiment what you said about the line. I no issue with Martin being favored, but by this much, I mean, not even doing the old, I'm going to go look at her record on Line Breakdown and just go off of that. But yeah, you do that, and it's not that impressive. I went to my grading the winners column, James. You know what grade I gave her for her debut? A C. And I'm the guy who's accused of giving everybody A's, which I did this week. And in that article, I wanted her to get at least 2 or 3 more fights. She got 1 and got mat time for 3 rounds against a name that I'm not familiar with. But then they threw her right in there with Verna Jenny Droba. And even if that's a fight where she wasn't healthy for, which, by the way, that's great insight. Thank you for that. But it almost muddies the sample size even more, because now that we're seeing Verna kind of get her feet under her and performing how she was supposed to do, perhaps that was a bad matchup in hindsight, regardless if Mallory was healthy, right? So maybe I can't blame the line for being this high. I don't agree with it. I think this is maybe not a pick'em, but closer to a pick'em than a 2 to 3-1 favorite, where she's trending towards. So I'm gonna lean toward Martin, but I'm gonna reserve my official pick. I'm gonna look a little bit more into this fight because, it just doesn't feel right to me.
No, totally agree with that. The last thing I'll sort of say on this kind of reminds me of the main event a little bit, where I think everyone's really fixated on Anthony Smith's loss to Glover Teixeira, kind of the same way they're fixated on the way Hannah Cyphers looked in their last fight. But you got to look a little bit closer at those, stats a little bit, right? Like Glover, tough guy to finish. Smith wasn't able to do it. So of course, he ran out of gas. Like people who think that Anthony Smith has bad cardio, that's not the case. I mean, here's a guy that, trains in Denver. He's getting, elevation training. It was just the fact that he couldn't finish Glover and then he got tired, but it's not a case of bad conditioning. Same thing here with Hannah, where it's like, I feel like people are, looking at, oh, she looked terrible in the last fight. Well, yeah, she fought a flyweight, right? Like that's like Michelle Watterson fighting, Valentina. How do you think that would go, right? Like, I'm not saying Valentina is Agapova, but you kind of get what I'm saying. A lot bigger of a fighter as far as that goes. So that's sort of what I'm getting at here. But I'm with you. Fight stays on the feet, very even fight. If it gets to the ground, I give the nod to Martin. So that's where I'm going with there. All right, we're going to talk about one more fight. We're going to stick with the women's division as well, but we're going to go down to the strawweight division in this one. Actually, we're still in the strawweight division. That fight was at strawweight. I was thinking flyweight, kind of threw me off a little bit. But Emily Whitmire and Polyana Viana. Now, Dan, you know Emily very well. She was at Extreme Couture, but actually for this camp, she hasn't been at Extreme Couture. She's at Syndicate MMA, which I think is a great move for her. But let's talk about the line first. We've got Emily Whitmire coming in here at about minus 150, almost around there. Viana, the underdog in this one. I get it. I think with Whitmire, a couple things. First off, that first fight that was supposed to take place in March, Whitmire got really sick. She told me in the interview, said, look, I should have pulled out. People saying, oh, she was undisciplined, and that's why she missed weight. No, it was because her body was fighting a virus, so she couldn't get any weight. So that's why too. So you can't put too much stock into that. And you look at her losses. I mean, they're not bad losses, Dan. Amanda Ribas, look how great she looked in her last fight against Paige Van Zandt. I mean, a lot of people get submitted by her. Jillian Robertson, who's, still a very young, promising prospect. That's a tough debut to have in the UFC. Got the wins over Jamie Moyle and Albu. But the thing with Whitmire that I've always felt, and it was sort of revealed on The Ultimate Fighter as well, too, is that, here's a girl that, mentally just sometimes checks out. And I think the skill level's there. She trains with the best in the world, but it's just a matter of putting it together in the cage. And I think her going to Syndicate, you just hear it in her voice. You hear her in the interview when she's talking about, preparation and not having any distractions. She's made a lot of changes heading into this camp, including being at Syndicate, where she's only pretty much training with girls. So she's getting to work with Joanne Calderwood and Sarah Kaufman and, all these other, Roxanne Modafferi, who's got a fight coming up here soon against Andrea Lee. So, I think that's great for her. And she was getting, some training with women at Extreme, but there's certainly more women at Syndicate. So I think that's a good move for her. And just hearing that she doesn't have any distractions, I think that's definitely a good move. With Polyana Viana, bit of a disappointment, 3 straight losses, including one to Hannah Cyphers, who, she's bigger than. So it's one of those things, she couldn't capitalize on that, and lost her last fight by armbar. So I think if this gets to the ground, kind of like the Mallory Martin fight, I think Whitmire could go out there and get a submission like we saw in the Albu fight, where, the ground game is certainly on point. So I think Whitmire, I think there is some value at her at about a minus 150. The question is, does she put it together? Just from everything she's saying, I think she will. And I think she's very well rounded. And I think this could be one of her best performances. I think this is going to be like the Jamie Moyle fight, where she really just shines. And, now that there's nothing in her way, she's going to look really good in the cage. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this fight.
I'm always going to be a bit biased. I like Emily since she was an amateur coming out here to Vegas and going from there. Now fighting down at 115. I was curious on that myself. And I was joking with James. I'm like, between the interviews and now her moving to Syndicate, I'm like, you know her better than me, my friend. But the good thing about Syndicate, man, no hate there. Obviously American Top Team as one of the biggest gyms and one of the biggest women's stables traditionally for a long time, from Valley Laterno to even right before Ioane and Jacek was there. However, Syndicate is one of the gyms on the West Coast that has one of the better women's stables, I would argue, from Roxanne Modafferi planting her flag to other fighters that have come through and are still there. So that's definitely good news as far as women training with women. That seems to be a good and rare recipe. I like that. I like the stylistic matchup. I think it's one where Emily can shine. But yeah, is she working on her stand-up with John Wood out there? What improvements has she made in the rest of her game? And is that going to take away? We see that adjustment time when they switch camps, and not saying Syndicate's going to do that to her and change her from the fighter that she is or should be, but you never know. There's always those adjustment periods. So that's a little, worrisome. Is minus 150 a point of entry for even a chalk play? Absolutely it is. If you want to look for maybe some sub action, I'm sure you're probably going to find a plus number there too. And I'm sure you'll find me, over there sprinkling my degenerate bets on fight day. However, it's not one that I can stand hard on. And even if I did run this one through the proverbial comb, James, I always got to state my biases, and I'm probably always going to be biased for Emily there.
Absolutely. One other thing I'll just mention on this fight, both women coming in off a serious layoff. Viana hasn't fought since August of last year, so it'll be a full year. Whitmire, that lost to Amanda Hebas, that was back in June of 2019. So a really long layoff for her, but I think the time off has been better, allows her to develop things. And she actually told me that for the first fight with Viana that was scheduled in March, she was at Syndicate then as well. So it looks like she's got a lot of time to work there. So we'll see. You're right, though. I mean, certain fighters, when they switch camps, sometimes it backfires. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that as far as that goes. So there you go. That is our preview of UFC Vegas 8, which goes down, like we said, at the Apex in Las Vegas. Before we wrap things up, got to mention BlitzBet. Check that out. If you're in Canada, make sure you're using those lines. Really great service and really great odds as well. They're always on top of all the fights and everything and all that. So keep an eye out for all the lines and everything there. Make sure you watch the show every week. Make sure you watch my show, Octagon Outlook, every Monday, 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure you follow me here on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Dan, I'll give you the last word though, man. Where can people find all your work at MMA Junkie and everywhere else? What do you got going on?
Whether it's my work, my podcast, the Protect Your Neck podcast, just follow me at Dan Tom MMA. But first and foremost, make sure you follow Line Movement at Line Movement, linemovement.com. Subscribe to the channel, like this video. And folks, if there is not a comment about James Lynch's shirt and the awesomeness of it, and none of you showing your old school video game flags, I'm going to be very disappointed. If someone can comment the video game or a character or any of the references from James's shirt over there, you will get a moral gift package from me in the air. It doesn't exist, but please comment, like, and thank you guys for joining us. Big thanks to James Lynch for handling hosting duties today. And if you like the content on the betting show for Line Movement, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter, like the video, and always hit up that comment section.